This lady last night, she spoke about 3 crisis bridges. She used the word bridges, which I thought was interesting. Adolescence, midlife, and old age. Yeah, do you remember? And then she spoke quite a lot about 2 of them, but not really a lot about the third. So I, like many people, experienced, it started when I was 18, a crisis. What is the meaning of life? Why am I here? Is there a God? Many, many questions. I finally went to university with much excitement that they would answer these questions for me. It didn't take me very long to realize they were not going to answer these questions at all. And so I left and I traveled all over, and I was a sailor on the sea, and I hitchhiked in those days, and I searched through many spiritual movements. I entered a Zen Buddhist monastery. I was looking what is Scientology when I was in New York City. And then in San Francisco, I met the books of Rudolf Steiner, and then I thought, where's this man? He must be either in San Francisco or New York. I need to meet this man. He's written so many books. All of these topics interest me. Well, then a teacher from the Waldorf School was in the bookshop, and he said, maybe you should take this one, and he gave me Theosophy. And then I had discussions with him, and he invited me to a meeting with Francis Edmonds, who was the director of Emerson College in England, and he came to San Francisco and invited me to Emerson College, where I then began to study anthroposophy. So that was my first crisis. Then I met my wife, who also went to Forest Row. She's French, but she was interested in anthroposophy. And then we got married, and we had 5 children. David is the first. And I had to make a living. I was very interested in Rudolf Steiner's social ideas, so I went back to Emerson College to study at the Social Development Center, where they taught us how to work with people in industry. It was started by people from Holland, from the NPE. I don't know if you know this organization. So then I began my life with my family. We moved around a lot. We eventually settled in England, and I worked mostly in England, sometimes in France, sometimes in Germany, very infrequently. But mostly I worked in many, many organizations as an organizational development consultant. And I specialized in studying the processes of the company. I would map the processes. What did people do to add value to their work? And I was very excited about this because I knew with any company existing in those days, now all the companies have changed radically, but in those days, in the 80s and in the 90s, you could go into a company, you could do twice the work with half the people and half the space. So what are you going to do with all those people who you don't need? Well, our message was, that's no problem. The company will grow and you will all have jobs. Well, I began to find out that wasn't true. The companies were consolidating, they were getting rid of people, and I even met a man from Japan in the Sony company, and I was doing a special program with supervisors, and I said, would they be interested in this in Japan? And he says, we don't really have many people in our factories now in Japan. So I began to be more and more disillusioned because I felt a kind of spiritual task, a spiritual mission to transform industry and bring these ideas of the threefold social order. And then I began to get very disillusioned that this would not happen and it was going the other direction. So I had my second crisis. And as David said, for many years, every morning I would get up at 5 o'clock and study anthroposophy for 2 hours before I had to go to work, or even on the weekends. So I was always interested in many aspects of anthroposophy. So I thought, I want to teach anthroposophy. So I quit my work. I was making a lot of money and had a good company I was working with, but I was very disillusioned. So I went to America, to Chicago. I took a little job there to help with a teacher training place in Chicago. And there I met people who were just beginning to teach about Waldorf education in China. And they liked what I gave them. I gave them courses on theosophy and philosophy of freedom and knowledge of higher worlds. And they wanted me, then I got some emails, could I please go to China and teach anthroposophy? Because they had been introduced to Waldorf education. They were very interested in it, also Montessori, but they didn't, and they began to realize in China there was something behind Waldorf education. There was anthroposophy, and they wanted to know what this was. And the teachers were very sensitive in China not to speak too much about spiritual things. There was a question, how would this go with the government? Because you have people everywhere who will tell the government what's happening. But I spoke openly. I gave many lectures in many cities in China. But the first time I went, I asked can I bring my wife? Now my wife is a Hauschka massage therapist and trainer. And so when we got to China, the leader, he said, every anthroposophist that comes here, their wife also does something. What does your wife do? And she said, I'm a massage therapist. And so the Chinese immediately, they had no massage tables, but they took normal tables, and they started a massage course. And this became much more popular than my anthroposophy course. So at first my wife came with me, and then many years later, because from 2010 to 2020, when the pandemic started, so for 10 years we taught in China. And in the beginning she came with me, and then later I came with her, because she had many groups over 3-year periods studying according to the training that was developed here in Bol, in Egvelden, and where she did her training. So I gave the anthroposophy courses to the massage students, also to education students. So more and more, in the beginning it was more general public, and then more and more we were teaching anthroposophy and massage and to young people who were interested in becoming some kind of practical activity, doing some practical activity. All right, and I was doing that until the pandemic. And then the pandemic stopped everything. You remember. And at the same time, I was getting, and she was getting weary of traveling, of flights and airports, and the Chinese always taking us in cars forever. The traffic is horrible in most Chinese cities. And they wanted to take us to good vegetarian restaurants, and it would take hours to go places. And we were getting tired, worn out, yeah? And with the pandemic, we both felt we have to stop now. So now I'm really retired. Before, when I went to China, I was retired, but teaching. And now I was retired. Now what was I going to do? And that's when I decided, having studied anthroposophy so extensively, I had, of course, read many things from Rudolf Steiner about what the soul and the spirit experience after death, and also how important it is in this time, in your normal consciousness, to entertain these thoughts, because they will be very important for your orientation after death, which is a question I have, and I had to David, and a question we have for this seminar. My question. So I'm very much studying here, but I'm studying anthroposophy principally, because I've looked at Buddhism, I've looked at Catholicism, I've looked at what people have said about experience after death, and it's completely different kind of communication than what Rudolf Steiner gives. And that's why also in my studies with Rudolf Steiner, I realized anthroposophy is not a return to some ancient wisdom. Of course, he speaks about ancient wisdom, and David has too, how this has changed over the centuries until you come to the modern times. But Rudolf Steiner said, what I am giving is science. It happens to be spiritual science, not physical science. But I could not give what I'm giving if physical science had not developed since the 14th, 15th century. He even said, I could not have given my research about what I gave in occult science in cosmic development if Darwin and Haeckel had not been able to develop their thoughts about evolution, also Goethe. So this means, what does this mean? This means Steiner gives the results of his research, his scientific research. Of course, we can talk about how the methodology is different than physical methodology. But he gives his research, and this research is the rediscovery, it's the penetration of this wisdom of spirituality via the capability of making concepts, grasping concepts and being able to explain spiritual reality in concepts. And you know, many spiritual movements today, they say, you have to stop thinking. Thinking is the problem. You have to stop thinking and go into your breathing, go into your position, into your movement in your body. Steiner explains why they did this thousands of years ago. What was the effect of these kinds of spiritual activities? But he then, as you know, or many of you know, in the philosophy of freedom, before that in Wahrheit und Wissenschaft, he went on his own journey as a young scientist, but also clairvoyant. He went on his own journey. He obviously had beings who were holding him, guiding him, loving him, who he speaks about sometimes. The masters, originally he used to speak about them. But he had a particular task, and that task was to be able to penetrate with scientific rigor into the spiritual world and to bring back his research, his experiences, and put them in the form of concepts. Yeah. Now, so this was, if I was going to do this work, I had to find out for myself. 10 minutes, okay. What are Begriffe, and how is that different than Vorstellung? Because mostly when people are talking about thoughts, they're talking about Vorstellung. They're talking about images. But Steiner is talking about how these images are produced through concepts, and those concepts through intuitions. So I would like to do just a tiny exercise with you so you know what I'm talking about in terms of the research in Rudolf Steiner's work for the concepts of what happens after death. Is that clear? Shall I say it again? I want to do a little exercise to show you what I mean by concepts, and then you can see what this work would be like to really think those concepts that Rudolf Steiner gave about life after death. Okay. So I want you to, we're going to all of us produce the concept, a geometrical straight line. Very, very simple concept. Geometrical straight line. Yeah? So I want you to imagine, yeah, could be anywhere, but maybe, I want you to imagine before you a geometrical straight line, okay? You could probably have many, but you focus on one and try to hold that. It comes and it goes. Can everybody do that? Now, I want you to let the two ends of this line go to infinity, because a geometrical straight line is an infinitely extended line. I want you to now let your line, however you saw it, let one end, maybe the top end, or one end or the other end, they both go to infinity. Now, I think you'll see that you have to now really start to work, because you have to keep it going to infinity, these two ends. Now, a geometrical straight line has no thickness, has no color. That's just an image, that's a Vorstellung. But the thought of the line has no thickness. So you have to take away, maybe your line, you'll notice your line was black on white, or it was white on black, or it was some other form, but you had to imagine a form. Now I want you to take away all the thickness that that line has, so that it's infinitely thin. Now, if you're doing this, you really should be working right now, because the image keeps coming back. You have to get rid of it. You have to keep it going to infinity and have no thickness. Now we're going to take away the last bit of image. We're going to take away its orientation. It has no orientation. What happens there? We don't have much time, otherwise we would take much more time with these exercises. So this is just one exercise. What happened when you took away the orientation? If you were able to make it, to keep it going to infinity, to make it absolutely no thickness, just some kind of division, and then you took away the orientation, what happened? Yeah, but this is the concept, because, yeah, do you see? And if you do this again and again, you can have the experience. David had it when I first had him do the I am linearness. I am. Yeah? Now, this is only one concept, a simple concept. Steiner also gives the exercise the concept of a triangle. Think of every possible aspect of a triangle. This is the concept of a triangle, not the image of a triangle. Yeah? If I say any word that you understand, you will have an image, and it will all be different images. Some of them will be memories, some of them will just pop up. If I say ball, you have a picture. Is it an airplane? No, it's a ball. How come an airplane doesn't come up? Yeah? So these images, you don't control them, but you have to take control if you're going to discover a concept. Of course, in school, we learn abstract definitions of concepts. Yeah? So we can't do anything more now. But
embodiment exercises with us. So I'll leave my embodiment exercise out, then you have another quarter of an hour.
okay. So I had to do a lot of these exercises, because what happened at this crisis of 70, 71, 72, I started to feel gespalten, divided. Yeah, I recognized, especially when I would meet old friends, I'm this character, Jeff. They know this character, Jeff. They're this character that I know. My wife knows me as this character. My kids know. And I am this, before, yes, I am this character, but more and more, I'm so tired of being this character. Yeah? But through this work in anthroposophy, I had the concept of a higher self. Well, this could not be something I could image. Because this force, this idea, is going to make another, according to Rudolf Steiner's research, I will reincarnate as a completely different character, made by the same higher self. So, can I begin to experience this higher self? I can certainly experience this character, especially vis-a-vis other people that I know. Yeah? Or as soon as I get to know people, then I start to see, they see what I am and I see what they are. Yeah? But can I experience this other force in me that's going to make another character? And then I realized it could only be an active thing. I could never recognize it as an object. It creates object and subject. These are two other concepts. So I try to get a hold of this again and again, this higher self. Now, I don't know if you know the first class lessons, there's help very much to discover this. But that's something for everyone to decide. But
Maybe I should.
what?
You want to say something about the first?
Well, I began to realize that I could do these thought exercises and I would begin to go out of my body a little bit. And then I didn't know what to do there. And then I found, these exercises are like a GPS system. They tell you what to do. They tell you, they're full of turn around and look, yeah, see these things, do this, yeah. I was in groups before, people were trying to figure out how can we work on this, and I realized, well, first of all, you have to get out of your body. You have to get free from your images, and then you have to do what these mantras say. And for me, you have to do them in German, because as soon as they're translated into English or even French, they become very, very different. Yeah, I have this experience. So I read the lessons again and again in English, but I do the mantras in German because they're full of activity. They're full of doing and forming. Yeah. So that helps me a lot, but then I'm reading from Rudolf Steiner about how does one experience these concepts of spiritual science after death. How do you experience concepts after death? So first he explains, well, what is a concept now when you're in a body? What is a concept over and against a mental image, over and against a Vorstellung? And he explains very clearly, we don't have a strong enough light, but you can imagine that if I put my hand here, you start to see this shadow of my hand. Yeah? Now, if the light was brighter, the shadow would be much, much clearer. And if this is a very, like a white background, if this was very strong light, the shadow would be exactly an image of my hand. But the shadow would be nothing. Yeah. Thank you. Carried, guided. Yeah? You see that? And Rudolf Steiner says, this is like a concept. This shadow that we're experiencing is a concept. It is exactly nothing, not vaguely nothing, exactly the nothing of my hand. Just like your experience of the concept of the geometrically straight line is exactly nothing if you get a hold of it. Yeah? You can see this very simply if you say, this is a chair, concept chair. Yeah? Well, image-wise, like every chair, a throne, a tiny little chair in a doll's house, they're all chairs. Yeah? So what is the concept of a chair? Well, you know I need at least 3 concepts for the chair. If I only have 2, I have a stool. But with 3, I have to have some kind of support, some kind of single seat, and some kind of back. Yeah? But these are all concepts again, aren't they? So where's the concept chair? It's nothing in relationship to these 3 other which are images, but if I go to any of these images to find out what their concepts are, I need to embody it around other images, don't I? Yeah? So what happens after death with these concepts? We can study these concepts that Rudolf Steiner gives about life after death. Yeah? It first starts with, right here, with the moment of death. Very important, he says, this moment of death. After death, this moment of death is very, very important. We don't have time to talk about all that now. And I don't necessarily want to tell you because you could probably tell me things. My question is, I'll get to my question later, all right? So there's one concept which will help a lot, okay? So here we have our geometrical straight line. Now imagine here we have a perfect circle that shares one point on that line. Okay, do you see that? All right, now every circle, the concept of a circle, every circle has a central point, doesn't it? Otherwise, I couldn't know that the periphery was equidistant from something. So every circle has a central point. Let's say it's there. Now, what happens when I start moving that central point out? I still keep the point of the circle that touches the line, that still stays, but I move the center point of the circle out. What's going to happen to the circle? It's going to get bigger, isn't it? And what's eventually going to happen when that point gets to infinity? A circle is a straight line. Now, what happens if I go farther than infinity? Rudolf Steiner, this was a very important experience for Rudolf Steiner as a young man. When he first discovered synthetic geometry, and he realized what he was experiencing in the spiritual world without any concepts, now these were concepts for his experience. Yes? Because he could experience infinite spirituality, but he had no way to put it into concept. And all of a sudden, here, so if I start over here, this point at infinity comes back from here. Yeah? So what happens to this line? What happens to this line? It starts going like this, doesn't it? Yeah? Until eventually I end up with another circle here. Now, what's the difference between these 2 circles? If I'm inside this circle, I'm here. Do you understand that? Here, we're inside, is now the inside of the circle is all around, and this is the outside of the circle.
So I think that needs clarification. If you maybe do like this is the inside of this line, and that spreads, so the inside is here.
Yeah.
And this inside, as it goes further, is here, right? On the outside of this line.
Yeah.
Yes, understandable? The inside on that side becomes the outside.
And this is a very clear conceptual construction. You can all do it, yeah? And it's very important for the research that in the communications Rudolf Steiner gives about what the soul and the spirit experience after death. Yeah? Now, we don't have anything to erase with, so I'll do, all right. So you all know we could carry this on. No, I'll just do it here and then it's simpler. All right. Ah, yeah, we do have. So you have an eraser, but you have no blackboards in the school. Or is this from the cafe? Yeah? All right. You made it. Yeah? Ah, yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, so I could give you a whole course in what Rudolf Steiner says about what happens at this very moment of death, how important it is to see the dead spirit body, because it's like this circle. You are now outside the body, and the body is a point, and it will stay a point your whole journey after death. And it's that point you can always go back to have self-consciousness, because you will lose self-consciousness when you expand into the spiritual world, unless you can hold on to that memory in a certain way back to your last body. Yeah, because becomes a point now, and you become the periphery. We would need a lot of time to go through all these, but I could develop all these concepts that he gives. What happens for the first 2 or 3 days after death, and then what he calls karma loka, and then he talks about going into the planetary spheres and what happens, and then eventually the midnight hour, and then how the new incarnation is formed. We could go into all of these concepts that Rudolf Steiner gives on how the new being incarnates and picks up these sheaths. Is held by the family, by the mother, by the family, by the school, by the doctor. How these sheaths are there to hold the child, and eventually the child goes into life. Yeah, and we spend. And this was my point to David. We spend about 20 years giving the children concepts. And if they're in a Waldorf school, we don't give them the concepts. They find the way to generate the images out of the concepts that they gather, but the concepts are deep down in their own organization. But those concepts, just like what Rudolf Steiner says in The Philosophy of Freedom, pure thinking is also pure feeling and pure willing. So we want these images, these mental pictures, to always be associated with feeling and willing with the children, but not self-feeling, self-willing, but world feeling, world willing. But in specifics, in the Adler, for instance, what the child feels for this experience of this being, and the flower, always linked on the concept to the feeling and then to the will. How is it drawn? How is it sculpted? What are you going to do with it in the world? Yeah? So for 20 years, we prepare the child to go into life with these concepts, which are in there. They have many, many mental pictures, but they have really living concepts if they've gone through the right education and had the right caring, holding, loving, guiding, never alone. Remember that? So my question is, why not have an education here? Many, many people now. I mean, the average age used to be, not very long ago, average age of death, 80. 35.
And 50 years ago, it was like
65. Now what is it? It's 80, pretty much. Okay, and now you're retiring. Yeah, in France they want you to retire a little later. They're having problems with that, but you're retiring at, let's say, 65, and then let's say you live to 85. That's another 20 years. Why don't we have a preparation for life and death? And that's where this Umstülpung, this inversion, is very important. Yeah. Because Steiner says we're only fully able to do what we need to on earth if we've been more and more able to be awake in the life after death. Yeah? So you really have a limnoscate here, don't you? You have a smaller one here. It's not a very good limnoscate, but You know, I didn't go to a Waldorf school. I had to, luckily we sent our kids, but all right. So here you expand into the spiritual world. You literally expand, and we all eventually expand into the same space. We interpenetrate each other, and we interpenetrate the logos and the hierarchies. And then each of us starts a new journey and comes down and gets into an individual body. What do forces need? Forces of evil it needs to press that being down into a body. Yeah. So there are, last night the lady spoke about spirituality, but there's bright spirituality and there's dark spirituality. There's too bright spirituality. There's too dark spirituality. We need the concepts of Rudolf Steiner to understand spirituality, not just be happy that we have it. Of course we need to be happy that we have it. Yeah, I don't want to be negative, but I think we need science here. We need concepts, and we need to be able to do, because we're going to do research after death, all of us. Because we have these concepts of anthroposophy, we will begin to do research in these regions, because we need to come back. Because this is a very difficult time. You all know this. When we discovered anthroposophy in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they told Steiner, at the end of the century, yeah, well, what happened at the end of the century? All the planes were supposed to fall down 2002, was it? No, it's 2000. They were all supposed to fall down. Nothing happened. 2001, something happened with the Muslim world and the Christian world. Yeah, something started to happen. Then we had the pandemic. Now look what's happening. Now with technology and AI, artificial intelligence, how quickly it's going to go. It's going to get darker and darker and darker. They're going to control, no matter how much we can spread spirituality, these forces are very, very powerful. Yeah? And they will also bring spirituality. Yeah? You only have to read what Rudolf Steiner says about Ahriman. He will bring a tremendous spirituality, but you won't have to work for it. Yeah? It'll be like psilocybin. They give you a pill and you'll have spirituality. The problem will be when you die. You won't have anything to work with. You won't have... Now, that's what I wanted to tell you. How does this work? When you think these thoughts, they go into your etheric body, the freed part of your etheric body. Yeah? They become forms. Just like, a river's moving on, I throw a rock in it, then I start to have a form, and it's always there, right? So I have all these forms inside my etheric body about spiritual thoughts. Because Rudolf Steiner says, after death, all my material thoughts won't be operative. There's nothing I can do with them because they need the senses to operate. But in my dreaming, in my etheric body, I will have these forms. Now, this Umstülpung, here, we can't see, we can't understand much at all, really. It's really little what we can understand. But we can change everything, according to Rudolf Steiner. But we can hardly understand what's going on. It takes a lot of work. As soon as we're in the spiritual world, we understand everything, but we can't change a thing. And because it's everything, it's absolutely éblouissant. I have to use the French for that. It's absolutely impossible to contain consciousness if you can't dim down this spiritual light. And he talks about your etheric body expands, but you keep the essence of your etheric body. You keep an essence of your last life. And all these thoughts that you've been able to really think with a lot of activity in your etheric body, they go out to the periphery. And you become like an eye. So your etheric essence is out in the periphery, and your dead physical body, the image of your last body, is like a center, and you are like an eye. And the whole spiritual world is in between. And with the forms that you've held in your etheric body, you can come down and start to see particular things in the spiritual world. Otherwise, everything is there and everything happens at once and time is turning all the time. It's absolutely impossible to think unless you bring these dead thoughts that you've brought to life yourself, and now they're in you, and now you can think them and you can start to do research. just like scientists do research here. And with the effects of that research, you can practically come back and have the capacities that you all dream of having now, and none of us get them. You know this. When you were young, you thought, I remember David, I'll read Knowledge of Higher Worlds, then I'll become clairvoyant, then I'll do, yeah. This is a very important incarnation of ours right now, because this work didn't exist before. Aristotle's work existed, Thomas Aquinas' work existed, but Rudolf Steiner's work didn't exist before he did it from 1902 to 1925. He was able to go into the spiritual world, research, bring these thoughts down. For the first time, we can work on these thoughts. And because when we come back, and if we've worked on these thoughts, we might come back quite quickly. Yeah? Depends. It's very, we could talk about that, but anyway. Because it's going to get darker and darker and darker, and more control of the world. It has to. Steiner says the world has to become a crystal, a dead crystal. It will die. And we have to be back here to work with all that's going to happen. To bring that other, he says, as deep as we go down, we need to be able to go as high up above. And we will go deeper down. It's just the beginning with technology. Imagine where people will be soon. Already Apple just came out with this thing. Now everybody will be walking. Google tried, but it didn't look good on the women. And all right, but more and more people are now habituated to their phone. They walk around in Colmar. Tourists walk around with their phone. Tourists, and they go like taking pictures of Colmar, and they never saw Colmar. Yeah. So it's just the next step to bring that in here, isn't it? And just the next step, as we saw some pictures, you can have beautiful electrodes all over your head. All right, and my point is, and this is my question to you, because as anthroposophists we can talk to each other, but Rudolf Steiner says it's so important that humanity thinks these thoughts of spiritual science now. They don't have to believe them. It's not about religion. It's not even about believing it. It's just, can I think that thought? Just like you tried to think the thought of the geometrically straight line. If you are going to Denver, how many people have been to Denver? Okay. So you know what the Denver airport looks like. All right. Most of you don't know what it looks like. Let's say you're going to Denver Airport and you want to rent a car. And I say, when you get to the airport, now it's very big and you have to take a train and the car rental place is over here. These are mental images that I'm giving you. You don't have to believe them. You listen to me, yeah? You don't believe, I believe in Denver Airport. Yeah? You think those thoughts and they might be helpful for you to orient when you get there. Yeah. And you might, of course, your thoughts are made out of airports you've already been in. You're not thinking of really the Denver airport. When you get there, you see it, and then you remember these thoughts and these mental images, and then you find the car place right away. Yeah? That's what Steiner says we need to study spiritual science so that people have an orientation after death. Otherwise, it will get deeper and deeper and harder. And he says, humanity will have to split. He doesn't say how many will go one way or the other, but our jobs will be, just like our jobs right now are to have these workshops and to do this research and try to show people these things. Our jobs will be to work with what's coming in the future. And if we don't imbue ourselves with this work here, especially older people, I think, yeah? Because you get old enough that you're not imagining you're going to do that anymore. Yeah, you're not mixing in with your egotism so much. You're purely trying to think these thoughts because we're all going to die. That's obvious. Okay. So my question is, how can they bring these thoughts to the general public? Can we even? Can you do it over Zoom? Do you have conferences? You can't go out, the Jesus people, they stand on the street and they tell you, they give you the Bible and, what do we do? I know what to do for myself, Yeah? Maybe, my wife says, maybe you have to then do that work and help people afterwards, yeah? Because there'll be souls here. I don't, but I think, okay, but still, I still have a little spark in me. I want to maybe do something with people these last few years with these thoughts. So this is my question to you. Can it be done and how do you do it?
Let's work about it.
So, thank you very much, Jeff. Now, I'm speaking as two people here. One is your son, who I had to also, in a way, take distance from, and take distance from your views, because I grew up with views. I had to take distance from... ich bin Wechselnde. Ich musste auch Abstand nehmen von Anthroposophie, denn das ist ja ein Mensch mit ein bestimmter Konzept, eine bestimmte Ansicht, wie das Leben nach dem Tod ist, wie man sich darauf vorbereiten kann, wann man zurückkommt. Es gibt sehr, sehr viele Konzepte auf der Welt. Ein Freund jetzt, der mit uns auch arbeitet, von Afrika, für ihn ist es so, das werde ich vielleicht dann nach der Pause andeuten, sehr, sehr anders. Und ich nehme aber die Essenz mit, die Grundfrage. Die Grundfrage ist es Zeit, in der heutigen Zeit, in diese Periode was anzubieten, mit der gleichen Ernsthaftigkeit in Bezug auf eine Vorbereitung für später, wie wir das hier tun, mehr oder weniger gut und in ganz unterschiedlicher Weise, in ganz unterschiedlichen Bevölkerungen, aber immer standardisierter. Das hat vielleicht auch ein Problem. Vielleicht brauchen wir eine viel größere Heterogenität in unserem Schulsystem hier. Und hier ist es ganz klar, dass wir eine große Heterogenität brauchen, denn die älteren Menschen sind sehr, sehr unterschiedlich in ihren Bedürfnissen und Fähigkeiten und so weiter. Und mit dieser Frage werden wir uns morgen beschäftigen, für alle, die Interesse haben, um 9:30 Uhr am Gemeinschaftskrankenhaus in einem Raum, den wir gebucht haben, bis 14 Uhr, und jeder ist dazu eingeladen. Was brauchen wir hier?